What if the first words written by humanity were not just records of trade and harvests, but messages left by someone who wasn't exactly human? More than 5,000 years ago, in the silent lands of Mesopotamia, human hands, they pressed styluses into wet clay. They engraved symbols, numbers, prayers. And enter these traits, so simple and so ancient, lie behind one of the greatest enigmas in history, the Sumerian manuscripts. These clay tablets, forgotten beneath the desert of present-day Iraq, describe something that it challenges everything we believe we know about our origins. They talk about beings coming from the sky, bearers of science, mathematics, and wisdom who, suddenly, transformed pastors, nomads into temple engineers and cartographers of the stars. Who wrote these stories? And more disturbing, where did the knowledge they describe come from? If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is what you needed to hear. Official history teaches us that civilization began with the Sumerians, between the Tigris rivers and Euphrates. But when we look closer, something doesn't add up. No culture should be born so complete, so ready, so advanced. They didn't just create the writing. They mapped the sky with astronomical precision, calculated planetary cycles, and divided the time as we still do today. 60 minutes, 60 seconds. Direct inheritance of them. How, without telescopes, without lenses, without machines, could a people of 4000 BC know so much about the cosmos? The manuscripts say that they were not alone. They say that those who came down from heaven, the Anunnaki, walked among them. They taught how to sow, how to measure, how to heal, how to build. And when they left instructions carved in stone as if promised a return. Historians call this a myth, others of ancestral remembrance. But what if it's something different? An encrypted communication between the human and the unknown. Each Sumerian tablet is like an ancient mirror. When we look, we don't just see gods and kings, but also the reflection of our own search. Where did we come from? Where to let's go? And why do we feel that there is something above us, silently watching? The words are made of clay, but what they contain seems to be made of light. There are those who say that the stories of the Anunnaki are just metaphors, symbols for explain the birth of human consciousness. Others believe they are literal records of encounters with intelligences coming from the stars. But perhaps both readings are true. Maybe the sky they describe isn't only above our heads, but also within us. As we travel these ancient lines, we realize that time does not erase. It just translates. What the Sumerians called gods may have been science. What we call myth may be memory. And what we call history is perhaps just the surface of something much more deep, something that vibrates between the dust of the earth and the mystery of the infinite. Today, more than 5,000 years later, these tablets continue to whisper the same question. Who really taught us to write, to count, to look at the sky and call it home? If something inside you awakens with this doubt, stay. The answer may have been waiting for millennia, written in clay, kept silent, and now, ready to be read. Before the great empires, before the pyramids, before even Egypt erected its stones under the sun, there was a land between two rivers. The Sumerians called Itkiangir, the land of civilized gentlemen. Today, we know it as Mesopotamia, the birthplace of what we call civilization. There, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the desert was tamed by intelligence. People who before followed the rhythm of the stars and the harvests began to settle, to design cities, to build temples that touched the sky, as if, suddenly, an invisible code had awakened within them. In Uruk, Ur and Eridu, the first metropolises on the planet emerged. Planned streets, canals, irrigation systems, markets, schools, observatories, and pyramid-shaped temples staggered. The ziggurats. From their tops, priests observed the sky and recorded the movement of the stars on clay tablets. In them, the first human sentences were born. Cuneiform writing, small wedge-shaped marks, started out simple, describing herds, grain measurements, and taxes, but it soon evolved. It became the language of the soul and memory. Through it, the Sumerians left poems, laws, treatises, prayers, and descriptions of the universe. It was there, among the dust and silence, that the humanity has learned to count time and name the invisible. The most fascinating thing is that all of this came so abruptly. There are no records of a gradual development. It is as if civilization had been lit, not built slowly, as if a glimmer of knowledge had pierced the veil of ignorance humanity, handing them techniques, systems, and knowledge that seemed not to belong to, that was. The archaeals people ask themselves, where did such sophistication come from? How could people from the 4th millennium before Christ invent the concept of written law, the sexagesimal calculation, and the constellation map? Sumerian manuscripts speak of masters coming from above, luminous beings who brought the measurements of the earth, the rhythm of the waters, and the names of the stars. They say it was theirs that the kings learned to reign, and that human wisdom began when the gods touched the floor of Mesopotamia. But perhaps the truth lies elsewhere, inside the human being. Perhaps these gods are a metaphor for the awakening of something dormant in the mind collective, a leap of consciousness that transformed instinct into reason and survival into culture. In any case, what was born there changed everything. The Sumerian civilization taught us that knowledge can span millennia and still pulsate as if it were new. Each clay tablet is a silent witness to a time when man began to recognize himself as part of the cosmos. But this story still holds a deeper mystery, because between the lines of these texts, between kings, temples, and rivers, there are names of beings that do not belong to earth, and according to the tablets, they not only taught, but they also created. Who, after all, were these masters of the stars, and what did they really want with humanity? In Sumerian manuscripts, one word echoes like thunder that never fades: Anunnaki, those who came down from heaven, not as a poetic metaphor but as a literal testimony, beings who, according to tablets, came from a celestial kingdom to guide, shape, and even modify the very humanity. These writings describe a complex hierarchy. Above, Anu, the ruler of the firmament, the judge of the stars. Below him, Enlil, lord of winds and storms, guardian of order and law. And next to it, Enki, the god of waters and wisdom, the one who, they say, he felt compassion for humans and decided to teach them how to survive. The Ew. Tablets narrate that the Anunnaki did not observe from afar. They walked among the men. They taught how to irrigate, how to write, how to build. They showed how to calculate time, predict floods, measure land, and build temples. And more impressive, they described instruments and celestial chariots used by these gods to cross the heavens, something that, to ancient eyes, it must have seemed like pure magic. Therefore, many modern researchers wonder, are these reports just myths, agricultural, symbolic representations of nature? Or would they be recording meetings with real visitors, beings from another place, perhaps from another world? The texts go beyond simple devotion. On some tablets, the gods debate, feel jealousy, they punish, and even regret it. They are described with human emotions, passions, weaknesses. It is as if they are an elevated mirror, divine reflections of our own complexity. In one of these narratives, called the Council of the Gods, Enlil decides to punish the humanity with a great flood. Enki, moved by compassion, warns a man, Utnapishtim, and guides him to build a vessel to save his life. The parallel with the story of Noah is undeniable. Two cultures, two times, the same memory of a cataclysmic event. What if these gods were not just symbolic entities but time travelers or distant dimension? What if the legends of floods and recreations of humanity were echoes of reunions cyclical between us and them? But there is an even deeper reading. Perhaps the Anunnaki do not come from space but of the human soul itself. Perhaps they are a representation of the invisible forces that shape our evolution, archetypes of the collective mind, seeds of spiritual awakening. The Sumerians, when narrating that those who came from heaven taught man, were perhaps speaking of something within, of a cosmic impulse that pushes us toward the light of knowledge, like if the universe itself wanted to know itself through us. Therefore, every time we look to the sky in search of answers, we repeat an ancient gesture, the same look as the priest of Uruk, the same amazement at the stars. Sumerian manuscripts don't just tell us who the gods were, they ask us who we are and where we really come from, because perhaps the sky from which the Anunnaki descended is not as far away as we think. Maybe it starts within each of us. There is something hypnotic about the nights of ancient Mesopotamia. The sky, clear and silent, seemed breathed together with the earth. And it was under this starry veil that the Sumerians wrote what it is perhaps the first astronomy treatise in human history. Long before telescopes or lenses, they knew that the celestial vault was not a ceiling fixed, but a living movement. They mapped planets, differentiated wandering stars from fixed. They recognized eclipses, lunar cycles, and even the phases of Venus. With precision, which still amazes modern astronomers today, the tablets describe the firmament as a divine language. Each point of light, a sign. Every movement, a message. According to the SC Ribas, the gods left the knowledge of heaven as a mirror of earth. But how could they have such accuracy without instruments, without optics, without science? Modern? Some scholars say it was pure observation, centuries of notes passed down from generation to generation. Others believe they received direct instruction from masters unknown, the same Anunnaki who, according to the tablets, opened the eyes of the men to the wisdom of the stars. These texts are not simple myths. They talk about planetary cycles that were only confirmed thousands of years later. They talk about Saturn, Jupiter, and even a celestial body called Nibiru, described as a wandering planet that crossed the heavens in long and precise intervals. Was it just a metaphor, or a memory of cosmic knowledge that was lost? For the priest astronomers, the sky was the mirror of the soul. Watching the stars was understand your own destiny. Each constellation symbolized an inner strength, an archetype in motion. They believed that man was born under the reflection of the stars and that, when studying the firmament, he rediscovered his own origin. There is an almost scientific beauty to this vision. For the Sumerians, spirituality and knowledge were not opposites, but faces of the same search. Looking up was a form of prayer, deciphering the sky, an act of faith. What if this faith hid an ancient memory? What if the wisdom of the stars were, in fact, an inheritance left by consciousnesses that came from far away, not to dominate, but to remind humanity that it too belongs to the cosmos? It's possible that by looking up at the sky, the Sumerians weren't just learning about planets and stars, but rediscovering masters who spoke through light. Masters who didn't need temples, just the vastness of space to reveal themselves. The echo of this wisdom still pulses within us, when we feel that there is order in chaos, an invisible harmony guiding time. We are listening to the same music that the Sumerians listened to. Maybe modern science and ancient myths are just two different ways of thinking. Decipher the same melody. If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may not just lie in the stars but in remembrance of what we are made of. Some stories don't go away. They just change their voice. And the manuscripts Sumerians seem to retain one of these voices, a memory so ancient it defies belief. Time. Many scholars believe that the clay tablets were not the beginning of civilization, but the echo of something previous, as if the Sumerians had inherited fragments of a much older knowledge, coming from a forgotten era, perhaps from people who disappeared before the story even began. This hypothesis has gained strength with recent discoveries. In southeastern Turkey, archaeologists found Göbekli Tepe, a temple built more than 11,000 years ago, even before agriculture. Its carved columns show astronomical symbols, sacred animals and figures that seem to observe the sky. Nobody knows who built it, nor why, but there is something in common with the Sumerian tablets, the same obsession with stars and the idea of knowledge from above. What if the Sumerians hadn't invented everything out of thin air? What if they were the heirs of an ancient lineage, guardians of a wisdom transmitted of lost civilizations, perhaps survivors of catastrophes that erased almost all human memory? Some texts speak of floods, of gods fleeing in heavenly ships and returning later that the waters receded. Others describe cyclical eras, golden times followed by ages of oblivion. It is as if humanity lives within a spiral. It learns, forget, be reborn. And the tablets would be the testimony of one of these new beginnings. The most intriguing thing is that these myths are repeated in cultures separated by oceans and centuries. The Mayans spoke of stellar visitors who taught them how to tell time, the Egyptians of gods who came down in boats of light, the Hindus from masters coming from distant constellations, And the Sumerians, of beings that descended from the sky. Were they coincidences, or collective memories of the same origin? Modern science is beginning to admit that our ancient civilizations may have been more connected than we imagine. Trade routes, cultural exchanges, and migrations can have spread symbols and myths across the planet. But there are those who say that the link goes beyond Earth. Perhaps there are invisible archives, fields of memory that span space and Earth. Time. Jung would call them the collective unconscious, the ancients of books from heaven. In them, all the stories already lived would be saved, ready to be remembered when the world is ready. The Sumerians, perhaps without knowing it, decoded part of these files, and what we call of myth may just be a poetic translation of something real, an encounter between the human and the eternal. Because if the knowledge that created us came from a forgotten past, that means we are also carriers of this same, the spark. The same light that once came down from the sky still sleeps within us, waiting for the moment to come. Be remembered. The silence of the boards is only apparent. They keep talking, and perhaps they are calling each of us to remember who we went. The Sumerians didn't just record stories about the gods. They recorded instructions. Between lines of hardened clay, there are formulas, measurements, celestial maps, and moral laws. Each symbol seems to bear a correspondence between heaven and earth, as if the entire human knowledge was a reflection of the cosmic order that the Anunnaki would have revealed. These tablets speak of something beyond technique. They talk about principles, of balance, of reciprocity, justice. The same virtues that shaped their cities also structured their beliefs. The king only ruled legitimately if he was in harmony with the divine decree, a kind of moral frequency that linked the throne to infinity. It was as if political and spiritual power were just faces of the same purpose: maintain the flow between the human and the divine. Among the texts, one stands out: the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest set of laws known. Centuries before Moses, he already defined the value of life, truth, and repair, not as imposing commandments, but as a reminder that the command of heaven also lives within the heart of man. What if this was the true legacy of the gods? Not machines, not weapons, not miracles, but conscience. Perhaps the Anunnaki were less engineers and more teachers, messengers of a wisdom that transcends time. The manuscripts suggest that knowledge was not transmitted only in words, but by vibration, for example. Sound shapes form, said an old Nippur hymn. The voice, it was seen as a creative power, and when the priest pronounced the name of a god, he was believed to be awakening his presence within himself. This idea echoes in later traditions. The word that creates the primordial the Word who was God. Perhaps it all stems from the same ancestral perception, that the vibration of the sound connects man to the cosmos. The Sumerians understood the world as a mathematical harmony. Your measurements, based on the number 60, they structured not only time, but the music itself. One day for them, it wasn't just duration, it was rhythm, a cycle between light and shadow, order and chaos, breathing and silence. This unified vision was lost over the centuries. What was once sacred science fragmented into religions and disciplines. But the boards are still there, trying to remind us of something simple and profound, that the universe is not outside. It is within us, that every star reflects a spark of the same energy that pulses inside the human chest. Perhaps this is the true gift of the gods, the reminder that we were made image of the cosmos, not physically, but spiritually, and that every time we seek meaning, we are, without realizing it, trying to return home. The legacy of the gods was not lost. It just became inward, and when we silence the world for a moment, we can still hear it, whispering in our own voice. Everything above reflects what is below. This phrase, recorded in Hermetic texts millennia later, already existed, in a certain way, in Sumerian tablets. For them, the universe was a great mirror, and the human being, the living reflection of a celestial. Mystery. In the ancient schools of Ur and Nippur, scribes learned that each part of the body corresponded to a star, each beat of the heart to a movement of the sky. The soul was a fragment of light, temporarily sheltered in the clay of flesh. When we died, they said, this light returned to the firmament, joining the choir of constellations. If the Anunnaki, descended from the sky. Perhaps they did not do so in ships, but in consciousness, infiltrating the human being, awakening him to his own creative power. O heaven would not be a distant place but a state of memory, a field where every mind can reunite with its stellar origins. The tablets describe that man was fashioned in the likeness of the gods. But what does it mean to be similar to something that inhabits the infinite? Maybe it means having within you the same impulse that moves the galaxies, the need to create, love, understand, and seek what is eternal. The Sumerians did not see the divine as something unattainable. They believed that the gods needed men as much as men needed the gods, as both were expressions of the same energy divided into two plans. This is a profoundly modern and spiritual idea at the same time. Human consciousness would be the portal between heaven and earth, the border where the universe meets recognizes. Every thought, every gesture, every prayer would be a bridge between the worlds. So, perhaps the celestial visitors did not come to teach us how to build temples, but to realize that we, ourselves, are the temple. What if the Sumerian manuscripts are actually an awakening manual, not an archaeological record, but an invitation? And every symbol, every myth, every name of God could be a code to activate memories forgotten, memories of when we knew we were part of the whole. Modern man still seeks the heavens with telescopes, rockets, and questions, but perhaps the way back is not above, but within. The Sumerians, in their silent wisdom, seem to already know this. They knew that matter is only the veil of light, and that the divine speaks through what we call I. Perhaps the true origin of humanity is not lost among distant stars, but waiting to be recognized in the glow of a human gaze. Because when man discovers himself infinite, heaven and earth finally become one. And it is at this meeting point, between the visible and the invisible, that the story of the gods continues to be written, not on clay tablets, but in us. Perhaps the Sumerian manuscripts are not just echoes of a distant past, but mirrors of who we still are. Between lines engraved in clay, they remind us that the true mystery was never in the gods that came from heaven, but in the fact that man himself learned to look it up. For millennia, we have tried to decipher the same questions. Where do we come from? Who taught us to think? And why do we continue to feel that something inside us does not fully belong on earth? Perhaps because this feeling is the vestige of an old memory, the memory of that we were once part of the sky that we contemplate today. The Sumerians called this Anunnaki. The poets called it the soul. Science calls it consciousness. But deep down, they all talk about the same spark, the same silent fire that insists on shine even under the weight of human clay. When we read those tablets, we are not just studying archaeology. We are reading the first letter written by humanity, and perhaps addressed to us same. A message to remember that the divine never left. It just changed shape. Because every ancient word is an invitation to remember, not to believe. And every star in the sky is a still open page of the same universal book. If this message touched something for you, subscribe and follow us. The journey doesn't end here. It just changes dimensions. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul, silently, still tries to remember?